5G and coronavirus has been a link to a talk with Dr. Thomas Cowan. Has anyone seen this, and what is the thoughts? Anyone want to jump in on the link between coronavirus and 5G?
Okay. I think, do you know what? There are no scientific studies that actually truly correlate the two. What I will say is that when you change the environment, the body responds in certain ways. I would even go as far as to say that, you know, it has been shown, I'm being very careful about my words here, but we have a history of changes to the electromagnetic field like globally, and every time that we've had those changes, we've seen viral activity increase. What I would like to see some studies on is, because we do know that Wuhan was a 5G test site. We know that some of the ships were smart ships, in that you wear a little radiation pendant around your neck that allows you to have a certain amount of Wi-Fi everywhere that you walk. This is really concerning for me. And we know that things like body scanners and things like that in airports can also increase that kind of viral activity. But to date, we don't have any scientific papers that correlate that 5G exposure with the coronavirus. Yeah.
I think it's interesting or important to highlight that the effect on the immune system, we know conclusively, just given all the scientific evidence that was just shared. So the fact that EMF, or non-native EMF radio frequencies in general, affect the immune system the way that they do, you know, that is an important thing to be aware of. But yeah, to draw direct causation between that and the virus is a pretty bold step that we as a group are not willing to make. But I think, like what Dr. Cowan talks about and his kind of reframing of germ theory and what is a virus and what is actually happening in the body when cells, you know, excrete these viral looking particles or exosomes. It's interesting work for sure, but what we do have is rock solid science saying that it affects our immune system and our ability to fight off pathogens in general. So that should be enough for people to push back and say, well, we don't want any more of this, whether there is a possible pandemic or not.
Yeah, I think also, you know, we have some reason for concern around the 60 gigahertz frequency and how that impacts the respiratory system. So, you know, whether there's a direct link or not, then obviously when we've got something that's currently going around society that is impacting the respiratory system, we should be questioning why we're then rolling out and speeding up the rollout of something that could potentially make that worse.
Awesome. Well answered, guys. Thanks very much. Another question from Deb was, it was reported in the local paper in Busselton on the 11th of March that the 5G network is live in Busselton now. Is there anything we can do to stop the rollout?
Yeah, I think going to what we spoke about, non-conventional paths of action and these different notice of liabilities and restoring accountability within government and industry for the harm that they are causing. I think that can absolutely bring remedy, but that process requires the individual to commit to learning about merchant law and what that means and what laws we are actually governed by, which no one ever speaks about. So
I think also maybe not to get downhearted, or sorry, you know, to not feel disempowered, I guess, because if they've rolled it out, they haven't rolled out the full infrastructure. It'll only be a very small amount of the infrastructure that's gone in. So while, you know, saying we're not going to have 5G in this area may not work, you can definitely work to stop the small cell infrastructure that needs to go with the 5G. And that's mainly the 4G small cell infrastructure, as well as looking to say that you don't want those higher bandwidths used. There's no reason why you can't go through and do that, because you know, nowhere have we rolled it out to its full potential or anywhere close to that.
Yes. And the action groups that are on the Stop 5G movement will enable other towns to stop it, and then this will perhaps make Bustleton raise their eyebrows to the topic and say, actually, we can reverse this in time, and that it's not serving our health. So it's just a joint effort, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great. A question from Helen is can we see more of the slides that have already been shared? Guys, will the Stop 5G presentation and your presentation, Deanne, will that be available at all?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, there will be like a complete version of the presentation I gave with the full script available on YouTube soon. We're just finishing off the referencing, but that should be up within the next week for people to see on YouTube. That's just through our pages. We Say No to 5G in Australia on YouTube and BitTube.
Amazing. Question from Sunny: has anyone lobbied Parliament?
Well, there's been quite a lot of action on the political level, countless emails and letters sent, email blitzes, phone calls.
We're also in the middle of the parliamentary inquiry into 5G that is active at the moment. And one of the issues we've got is that that's currently incomplete, and yet we're pushing the rollout. So there's a lot going on that level.
And yeah, just on the parliamentary inquiry topic, you know, people should know, Lou and I have been meaning to do like a bit of a sharing a video on it, just because of the treatment given to any person that was representing concerns around the 5G issue, and you know, for example, the Perth crew were made to phone in to the East Coast for their sitting, and then vice versa, when we could have just gone in and spoken here in Perth. And so they basically threw every trick in the book at us, even cutting out calls, and just it was so obvious what their intentions were, and to give us to cram, you know, we had experts from ECSFR and ORSA and other people talking, and we were crammed on and given limited time space, you know, sharing 45 minutes, getting cut short, not having questions answered and certain things. And then you compare Telstra and those that were on the side of rolling out 5G, getting a full 45 minutes, given the respect to have their things said. And with all that's being rolled out now, it should be quite obvious what's going on when halfway through the parliamentary inquiry, they're announcing, you know, $10 million of taxpayer money to basically educate the public and be done with this fake news, which we just shared is all completely backed by science. And yet our tax money is being used to silence us halfway through the parliamentary inquiry, halfway through the process of whether they decide whether to go ahead or not. They're already funding the narrative with our money. So that's just, you know, we should be really clear that there is a certain dynamic going on. And really only because of Byron Bay's recent success that, you know, they have shown that things are possible on that level, which is great. And anyone that is interested in that level should follow that document to a T, because that has been their recipe for success. And then any others that wish to go deeper with the Empower process, with things that Choosing Freedom are doing, we absolutely welcome you on board to look at that with us.
Thanks, James. That's a very thorough answer. Very quick question from Katie. Who is ZME Science? Just got sent this from someone debunking the 5G myth.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, never heard of him. And I think I did answer that early on before I think everyone was logged on, just saying that, look, there are paid trolls and debunkers. And if you put too much energy trying to debunk the debunkers, I mean, they're not open to talking. They're not open to having their minds changed. A lot of them are paid. And so, you know, if you really understand the information that was shared tonight, if you understand the scientific literature, you understand the dynamic of who funds the study, all of those things, then it becomes very easy to see through any of these debunking claims, because they rely on the same things like, oh, non-ionizing radiation doesn't have enough energy to remove, you know, the electron, and simple things like that. You see through it straight away. So just become more educated, and, you know, you can help the people that want to be helped, and just leave the trolls do their thing.
I think also, you know, electromagnetic hypersensitivity is a recognised disability in some countries. We've got a lot of medical doctors that are treating people with EHS as well. And we can see in the blood works, amongst other things, that this is impacting people's health. So, you know, there is nothing that anyone could say when it comes to debunking that this kind of radiation or frequency doesn't impact the body, because, you know, as practitioners, we're working with these people, and we know that when we remove that exposure, that those people, the severity and the frequency of the symptoms that they're experiencing go. Yeah, it's quite simple, really.
Got a great question from Michelle for Deanne. How do you hardwire a smart TV, and is this possible? And can you go to Optus and get a specific modem that is suitable to plug into the wall, and it won't affect you with the Wi-Fi?
Yeah, so I definitely suggest jumping on the video series, because we go into this step by step. But in a nutshell, there are different routers that you can get. You don't want to have a smart router. You especially don't want the Telstra routers, because they use the cellular data as well. So even when you turn the Wi-Fi off, they tend to still emit. Depending on who your provider is, most of the time you can bring a different router to that. So you can just go and buy one like an Asus, or you know, a model that you can easily disable the Wi-Fi. It might be that there's a button on there, or you might need to log into that and turn that off remotely, which again, you know, I'll discuss in the videos in a bit deeper. But you can definitely hardwire your smart TV. It's just a matter of running a cord or an Ethernet cable to it. They all have an Ethernet port on the smart TVs themselves. And you can do that. There's a number of ways that you can do that. If you don't hardwire the home, and I do think getting someone out to put hardwired ports through a home is really important, especially if you're looking to stay there long term or you've got a lot of users. But what you can also do, I don't know, actually, you can get like these guys. What these do is it'll go from your router. You'll have a cord that goes from your router, an Ethernet cord from the back of your router. An Ethernet cord will go from your router to one of these little plugins that'll go into your 240 volt socket. And then from there, you can take a wire to the back of your smart meter. I'm sorry, not smart meter, smart TV. It is actually a really easy setup. It just needs to be on the same electrical circuit, but it's a great way to cheaply hardwire homes, and you can get them from JB Hi-Fi for anywhere between $130 to $200. You just then need to make sure that you turn off or disable the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth that are on the smart meter. Sorry, I keep calling it smart meter. On the smart TV, in the settings itself, some will still have some other antennas going, but they won't travel far and they won't be too impacting. So yeah, you can definitely hardwire a smart TV, and you can definitely change over a router if you've got one that's using cellular data like a smart TV to stop it from emitting.
Awesome. You mentioned the router name was an Asus, is that correct?
There's lots of Asus, like I did bring a whole heap of props because I was doing other videos today and I can't find any of them. Yeah, so ASUS is just one brand, but you know, my office is with Aussie Broadband, my home is with IINet. Both of those I've got routers with that don't use cellular data, so they're not a smart one, but I can easily turn off the wireless to it, and I can also run a corded landline to that as well. So I can use, and that's what I use most of the time, is a landline that I've run a cord back to the router and used that way.
Amazing, thank you. Good question from Louise. If there's so much evidence that 5G is bad for you, why aren't any universities discussing this topic?
Firstly, they will not get the funding to study it. So, and this is something that I'm sure Nicole Bilsma can share on this. I know she was trying to get some funding to do a study on electromagnetic fields, and that went to a psychologist instead, is my understanding. You've got to understand that studies are paid for by companies and organisations, and they're not going to pay for a study that's not going to be in their favour. And, you know, the telecommunications industry, they are so much bigger than the pharmaceutical industry, than the agricultural industry. They're, you know, a massive, massive industry, and they do not want that science to emerge. And there is no funding available for the universities to perform these studies. They just don't get approval.
Awesome.
So the science that we see covered tonight, Deanne, that's from the independent scientific community. So coming from institutions that fund it themselves.
Yeah, and we even see some of those scientists get ostracised out of, you know, the Carolina Institute and stuff like that. But, you know, interestingly, when we look at those studies, and I'm not sure if anyone's aware of this situation, but when in Italy there was a court case over cancer, and the judge ended up ruling in favour that the radiation had caused cancer. And the reason being is that he got both sides to put all of their studies together, because there were so many studies that, you know, were suggesting it was safe, and then there were so many studies that suggest it caused harm. And then he asked them to remove all of the studies that had been funded by industry to see what was left. And there were no studies that showed that it was safe, that were done by any independent person. So that was why he then ruled in favour of that. Yeah.
It does seem quite logical, right? That is the way you would kind of discern and work through the available information to arrive at what seems like a pretty obvious conclusion. So, and
the conflicts of interest are everywhere. If you want to look further into that, Don Maisha's Procrustean approach, really goes through in depth how industry has manipulated and set, you know, everything from the standards and beyond. It's pretty controlled, I guess you'd say.
Absolutely. Question from Candice: what do you say about the smartwatch? I mean, from my perspective, I think we'd be avoiding anything that's smart. Is that right, Deanne?
Mm-hmm. I think if anything, just a meme that says "smart is dumb" would probably sum it up. But so I know some people, you know, want to be able to know what their sleep is like. My suggestion is, you know, remove the EMF and you'll see how good your sleep is. But you know, for other things, so smartwatches for me are an absolute no. Every time you bring those devices into your home, or onto your body, you're just asking for trouble. But there are some of perhaps the older, like Fitbit type things. It depends what someone's using it for. But there are some that can be set to like download. So if you're just tracking it for certain things, then you can use those sort of older model Fitbits. If you're using it as like a, you know, a watch phone and that kind of thing, then absolutely not.
Yeah, it's quite a funny situation when you have people buying these gadgets to track their heart rate and do all this stuff with their exercise, because their desire to be healthy and fit, you know, is there, which is great to see. But yet they're buying the products that we know directly impact, you know, heart rate variability and those things. So it's this strange little oxymoron that hopefully people can understand that it's not conducive to your health.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if anyone is aware of the studies that were done between insulin levels and radio frequency or electropollution exposure, but this is something that Professor Magda Havas was doing, and where she had a client who would, you know, eat and her insulin levels would go up, she'd go for a walk and her insulin levels would just drop down naturally. And then she moved to a place, I don't know if it's cold or what the circumstances were, but she could no longer go outside. And so when she'd eat something, she'd then jump on the treadmill and try and, you know, do the same amount of exercise. And she was noticing that her insulin levels wouldn't drop. And so they then did a study of 10 women and found that when you have that radio frequency exposure or that electropollution exposure, electric or magnetic fields, that because of the stress created on the body, that it impacts the insulin levels. And that's something that, you know, if you're going to be walking around outside in nature and we've got 5G everywhere, that is a big concern for someone who has diabetes. And these sorts of things just aren't being looked at, nor are they being studied on any level that we can have any kind of certainty around what this increased exposure is going to look like for people with sugar imbalances.
And you'll see that a lot of those adverse effects and the ailments that people develop from the electrosmog, that basically everything is geared from all the major like health bodies and institutions to point people in the opposite direction to the causal factor of it and steer you away so that it's not EMF, it's not electrosmog, don't worry. And it's all these other things which, you know, once you remove people from the causal link between what they're experiencing, it's a really slippery slope where people aren't able to get better. And we see that more and more, and we notice through like Nicole, all the building biologists she's trained, Deanne, that it's only when you start to address things on this level that people finally start to feel some type of relief after going down every kind of mainstream promoted avenue. So yeah.
I mean, it is quite alarming that we are at such risk even before 5G is being rolled out. So even with our current technology, we are at harm. When I first learned about the dangers of EMFs and on my health, I did go out and get one of these tri-field meters, so then I could measure my exposure in the home. And it's also alarming that the smart meters have been installed on many people's homes without them even being aware. You know, some guy rocks up one day and he's working on the electrical board. The next day you've got a highly dangerous EMF producing smart meter outside your bedroom. So, you know, think tools like Faraday cages and things like that are vital when this happens. And like Deanne mentioned, you just notice how much better you sleep when you've got implemented these things and you are testing your exposures to make sure you are safe. Another question we've got from Catherine is, our internet connection comes from satellite, picked up from an aerial on the roof, then to the router. Are they already 5G?
So they are moving towards some, but yours probably isn't. You can contact them and find out what they're using. There will be some 5G satellite wireless is my understanding, but it's most probably not at the moment. But I'd just give them a call and just ask them what frequency it is that they're using, and then you still do the same thing in that you still want to hardwire from that point as well. Thanks.
And Roz asks, what paint and materials to make clothing from? Where can we buy these paints and shielding materials?
So firstly, I don't encourage anyone to do their own shielding. I've seen it done wrong so many times, because you're not just dealing with radio frequencies, you're also dealing with things like dirty electricity, electric fields. I've seen a lot of people do things like shield for a meter box, which is a magnetic field, doesn't even work, and then wonder why they're feeling worse rather than better, and it's because they've basically created their own microwave. So I really do encourage, if you're going to do shielding, which is an absolute last resort and is not necessary in, I would say, maybe 19 out of 20 homes that I assess, I would do absolutely everything first. And then as you are shielding, you need to have directional meters, which most people won't, because you need to be able to understand which way things are bouncing, where they're coming from, making sure that you've got everything internally. But you know, gigahertz solutions do good stuff. A lot of the actual shielding material itself, so like the curtain and the body materials, those sorts of things won't do those higher frequencies. They'll do those sub-6 ones. You also don't want to be wearing a lot of those kind of shielded materials because they also impact the body's electrical field as well. And there's some information around why we don't want to do that. So I really think if you're looking at shielding, it really needs to be done in combination with someone who is using directional meters and really understands and is also picking up things like the electric fields and dirty electricity. Yeah.
Thanks, Deanne. Another question from Sunny to you, Deanne. Is there any way that breathwork, diet and meditation, you can make yourself somewhat immune to EMF?
I think you can definitely reduce the exposure. I mean, reduce the way that the body sees the stress. So our bodies are designed to experience stress, go up and down. It's that prolonged stress that is the issue. If you were to be doing breath work and things like that, and you had a constant exposure, no, I don't think it would benefit at all. Because you've also got with, especially the pulse frequencies that we use now so that we can't pick up everyone's conversation, they basically have like a tapping action on the cell and they start to demyelinate the outside cell membrane. So as calm as you can be and as centered as you can be, it's still going to have that physical wearing action on the cell. And you could, I suppose, you know, like there are definitely things that you can take, like, you know, I take chaga, I take lion's mane, I take a lot of essential fats, I take propolis. There are a lot of things that I take because I can't control some of my exposures. But at the end of the day, no, it is so intense, those man-made exposures. Our bodies just are not designed to experience them. Prior to this, I did geobiology, so I spent a lot of time looking at the electromagnetic fields that come off the earth and things like that. Those are, you know, they're so minimal. And I think, yes, you know, you could overpower those through breath work and reaching different frequencies within the body. You know, which is what we've kind of known throughout civilization. But in these kind of things, they're just so intense and so strong that I would never tell anyone that, you know, just to do those things to help reduce their exposure. I would definitely say that they should be doing it as part of a normal, healthy lifestyle because we do have exposures everywhere, but definitely 100% need to look at removing the source.
Thanks, Deanne. Question from Travis. What are the electric waves that say come from our TVs or our modems and just general household items that are to be around? My general response to that is that if you can get your hands on one of these to protect or to measure what is coming from your TVs, what is coming from your microwave, smart meters in your house, that's a really good way to know. Life Force Whole Foods at the Shed Market in the Southwest will be making a device available for rent. So if you do live in the Southwest and these want to, instead of purchasing one of these devices which are expensive, you'll be able to borrow it from the store. Yeah, I think that's probably the only way of really knowing. Do you have anything to add to that, Deanne?
I also rent some meters. So we use the Safe and Sound Pro 2 is the one that we rent out. That's a great little meter. The little trifold meters, you know, they're good, but they are quite easily influenced by other fields. But, you know, I encourage anyone to have a device. If they're looking at the lower end of the market, like price range, then just the classic Safe and Sound would be the best one to go for. Safe and Sound Pro 2 is an amazing little meter. You know, it starts getting close to the really expensive meters that I use. It's just not directional. But as far as what's in the home and what's giving off, your TV itself is more like an electric field and magnetic field. The wireless communications are the radio frequencies that we kind of spoke about. The router, again, is the radio frequencies, and they all kind of sit in that kind of category that I spoke to before. Each frequency will have a slightly different impact on the body. Your normal TV itself really is quite fine. Electric fields and magnetic fields drop off quite quickly, so you just don't want to be, you know, sitting on top of it or right next to it. But you'll find that most people's couches are positioned back far enough that that's not impacting.
Yeah, because I think that question was from Travis, if I'm reading it now, and I think, Ryan, your connection cut out a little bit, but yeah, Deanne, he was asking about the electric fields that come from TVs and other stuff like that, and asking if they are safe to be around. So I think he answered that in terms of electric fields and magnetic fields dropping off
Okay.
quite a bit.
So most of your like house wiring, your electric fields will come out about 1.2 meters. They tend to, of everything that I measure, because you've got dirty electricity, magnetic fields, you know, there's different forms of electropollution. We've only talked about radio frequencies tonight, but electric fields tend to be the least offensive from what I've seen in clients. Magnetic fields drop off very quickly. The biggest source of that in your home is going to be your meter box, and you don't want to be sleeping on the other side of that. But yeah, electric fields tend, you know, as far as when you compare them to dirty electricity and radio frequencies, they're nowhere near as upsetting on the body. Someone who is electrically sensitive will still be sensitive to electric fields though.
Awesome. Question from Louise. My partner and I would like to look at moving down to the southwest in the not too distant future. Is there any known areas that are favorable to look at that are against 5G that we could be supporting? My immediate response to that would be that the towers do require to be in quite close proximity to the homes that they're servicing, and that finding a property that is not anywhere near the main town or the towers that are existing would be a good place to start. Deanne, is that right? Or is there anything to add to?
Yeah, I would also be looking, I mean, there's a few things that you could consider within the build itself. So number one, how long is your driveway? How far away are you from, you know, any light poles? Because you're going to be lower, it's not going to be rolled out as quickly for you, if at all. I'd also, you know, when we're looking at things like satellite and stuff, I prefer a tin roof. I specialise in mould as well, so there's always, you know, playoffs between tin roofs and condensation and stuff. But yeah, I would be looking for something that had a tin roof potentially. I would be looking for something that is set back away from the street, and obviously a community that's, you know, invested in health, which a lot of the ones down south are. I would be looking for a place with a lot of trees, and making sure that there's a lot of wildlife around the area as well, which is always a good indicator that, you know, that the electropollution level is reduced.
That's awesome.
Ryan, can I jump in just with a question that came through on the chat box from Facebook? And it says, do the shields that you put on your phones or stickers or plug into your house help? And there's also a question in the Q&A that says, what are your thoughts on these Bioshield chips, such as 5G Bioshield.com devices? That's a big one. Common question.
Okay. Given that we know that this kind of radiation is associated with cancer, we've got people like Dr. Charlie Teo talking out about the increased rates of gliomas and acoustic neuromas. There is no way that I myself would put a sticker on the back of a phone that's still going to emit the same amount of radiation and pulse frequency radiation to a child's head. Absolutely not. They're not measurable by any meters. The pulsing is still there, and I've not seen anything on the market that has reduced symptoms for people who are super sensitive at all. I have seen some people who have felt better around Blue Shield, and that's probably the only one that I've seen any, I guess, any consistent kind of feedback on. But most people will say that they still feel some exposure level. For me, there's safer ways to use the phone. Video calling over Wi-Fi of a hardwired phone is a really good solution, and using a landline. Keeping it away from the body, so using it in the hands, there's no vital organs there. But I would never recommend that because it's not measurable, it's not reducing the exposure at all. And given that we're talking about something that, you know, can potentially create a brain cancer, I don't think anyone should be encouraging that. It's not scientifically backed up at all.
Yeah, I always find that question a really interesting one, because it's hard. It is true that we can't, you know, quantify the results around that. And at the same time, you know, I've had some meetings with some people that seem to be doing incredible things with Tesla technology and 0-point energy, and it is hard to test because we don't have the means of testing it. You know, what happens through RF, through the meters that, you know, Deanne assesses with, and the blood work, like that's, we can't escape that part of it. But is there good things happening on a scalar level that modern science doesn't really understand? It's really difficult to, on one hand, endorse it, but another to dismiss it, right? Because we're just not, you know, maybe in some point in the future, we'll say, oh, wow, look, now we know that this does that. But the reality is we haven't studied that part of our reality, probably because there are a lot of secrets held within that area of 0-point energy.
I think also a lot of these technologies that we're looking at, and, you know, as I do geobiology, I do all sorts of weird and wonderful things with crystals and organites and things like that, and I absolutely love that. But in that aspect, we're dealing with earth energies, which is where we've had a history of using those sorts of technologies and ways of mitigating things like, you know, stress lines and geopathic stress and underground magnetic lines and nexus points and things like that. We've used all these sorts of things previously. It's just the level of radiation when you've got that amount of energy behind it. For me, I guess if I saw something that had been used, and I've seen absolutely everything, consistently give results, I would change my mind. I guess that's where I sit. And so until that happens, I think we need to be mindful of having a false sense of security. And I also think we need to be very mindful of creating a demand for companies to start putting things on the market that they think will work, that might be similar to some that have a bit more merit to them, and potentially causing a lot of harm. And one of the biggest concerns that I have is that I've seen people put stickers on their iPads and their child is using it, you know, sitting on their lap. We've got studies that show that you sterilize your eggs when you're exposing them to that. Our girls are born with all of their eggs. So for me, as you know, as building biologist perspective, if someone says, I'm going to put this sticker on my iPad because it's going to do this, and I know that that kid's going to sit there with that not on flight mode and potentially not be able to have children as a result of that, it's just not something that I'm willing to encourage.
Thanks, Dan. Does the Stop 5G movement have any big names backing you, or is it a case of the little people fighting a David versus Goliath battle?
The whole Stop 5G movement internationally or globally is really well supported by scientists. Every one of the scientists, none of the scientists or professors or doctors are there because they're trying to get their name out there. They're there because they truly care. None of them are funded in what they do. And, you know, they're all privately funded in that, you know, off their websites through donations and stuff like that, like the Environmental Health Trust. You know, so everyone is very, very supportive of each other. So even though it's very much a grassroots organisation, I've asked a lot of the professors to speak or supply me with information on certain areas, and they're very happy to do that because, you know, everyone is invested in getting the best outcome in it.
Yeah, I think what's good about a lot of the 5G movements is that at its core, it is driven by kind of your everyday person, just your average citizen, your mum, your dad, your whatever, just a normal person that cares. And so that quite often forms the nucleus. And then if you're lucky, you know, over East, I noticed their group, sometimes they have some bigger names that can do like live presentations and that. I think here in Perth, we're one of the most active groups, but at the same time, we rely on maybe, people from ORSA, like Victor Leach or some of these scientists abroad to help us out with events and stuff. But that's the beautiful thing in all of this, is that you don't have to be a world scientist, or you don't need to have a PhD in any of this to understand truth when it's put in front of you, to stand up for yourself and see something, and to discern fact from fiction, and then take what you know to be true with all the literature that we've shared tonight, and to share that with the next person. You don't have to have a PhD to share that information, and we all have the capacity to exercise consciousness and come to those understandings and help people grow in that way. Whereas we don't really want to put ourselves in a disempowered position and say, well, little old me, I don't have a degree in biophysics, therefore I can't really comment. So I think that's part of the process, is that for too long, the average person has felt disempowered, uneducated, unworthy of, standing up and having a say in what happens in their life. So it's a beautiful process as an everyday person to reclaim your power and do it with other beautiful, caring people.
Thanks, James. It's probably a good opportunity for people to check out Choosing Freedom later and find out more about how they can get involved with that. A medical practitioner is recognising and acknowledging EMF sickness symptoms anywhere.
Definitely internationally. A lot of the treatments that are being done in the States by environmental health practitioners often are being done outside of mainstream, I guess. Mexico, places where they have a little bit looser regulations and can treat a little bit differently. I think I mentioned earlier, it is a recognised disability in a couple of places, and a medical illness in many countries. I don't know how you would go in Australia. I mean, I think there's Dr. Russell Cooper, but going to any of our mainstream medical practitioners, and even any of our alternate or functional practitioners, and ask them to actually treat you, because it's not an area that they've ever been taught in. I do run practitioner workshops for them to help understand what's going on in the client and what they need to consider to help mitigate it. And most of the time when they come in for those workshops, they have very, very little understanding of what's going on. So I don't know many patients, and that's not even really a protocol in Australia. That's what the EMF Medical Conference in the States was for, as to how to treat those people. The best way that we can treat them, and this is the best way internationally recognised to treat, is to remove the source, and that is the only agreed protocol that everyone is using, is to remove the source, and then some will have different ways and things that they're using on top of that.
Thanks, Deanne.
In Austria, we shared it in the presentation, they've got a diagnostic process there to treat electromagnetic hypersensitivity. So yeah, definitely around the world there are. So it's quite a contrast when you see abroad that they're, putting out diagnostic tools, and then here there's just blind, no, it's not even a thing. Don't be stupid.
I think one of the issues as well that practitioners face is that, and this is one of the issues as well when you are trying to study the health effects, is there's often delayed health effects. So for example, if you drove in your car with your mobile phone on, which is a massive, absolutely massive exposure, it's one of people's most, highest exposures they're going to have, and your phone's constantly trying to find a cell tower, and your car's working like a little microwave, what can happen, and everyone's stress response will be a little bit different, but the body is under a huge amount of stress. It doesn't understand what's going on. You may have a stress response that's different to another person. You may get really angry and anxious and increased heart rate. Or you may, autistic kids have, very, very different responses again. But then what you might find is you won't notice it so much until you get out of the car, or you go somewhere where you're not in such a high exposure and the parasympathetic nervous system is allowed to kind of kick in, and the body all of a sudden starts to relax and you become very, very fatigued. So it's not as easy as being able to treat, because often people don't understand the relationship between the exposure and the health effects that they're experiencing. It's also very hard to work out what people are particularly susceptible to. So some people, it might be that Bluetooth. For me, I sold my car because the keyless entry was just an absolute killer for me, and the pain that I would feel in the back of my head was huge. But then, you know, when it comes to like a mobile phone, I don't notice it so much. So it's very, very hard because you're trying to treat something that you can't see, can't smell, you don't know, they don't know how to measure. And then the person, you can't see what they're actually going through, or it becomes really hard to treat. Yeah.
Thanks, Deanne. We've got a few more questions to get through, but if any of the panelists want to also reply with their answer on the chat, it'll be beneficial because we can only get through so many. Just a quick answer to this one, Deanne. If someone's going to get a pre-5G blood test to establish a baseline, what kind of test does one ask for?
They'd probably be best speaking to Dr. Russell about that, because, and you're also going to be you're going to have to be confident with who you're asking them for, because they tend to crack down a little bit, especially if you're going through a bulk billing like GP, because there's only so many tests that they're allowed to run and etc. But Dr. Russell would definitely be the best one to do that, because you don't want to go and get a complete full suite with your bloods and then go, oh, maybe I should have looked at this and this and this. There are other testing as well outside of that that you can look at if you are electrically sensitive. But yeah, Dr. Russell, I don't know if I can find the link from him on the bloods. I know I've asked him for it, then I'll post that up there. Otherwise, I'll ask around as to what would be the best, because I know a lot of people just getting, you know, like their full blood works done, which again, you've got to be careful who you go to and ask for that, because they don't like requesting it because they are expensive to do. Some people are just doing that, but if you're only going to kind of go once and get it done, then you want to make sure that you get things that you that we know will probably change. And like I say, Dr. Russell would be the best one to speak to on that.
Great. And where can someone find a link to his to contact him?
Lou, do you know?
We just popped in the comments section there, Sean shared Dr. Russell Cooper full presentation. So if you go through there, he does have contact details on his PowerPoint slide with his information. Otherwise,
I think that's on my website as well, his presentation.
Yeah, which is packed full of info.
Thanks, guys. While we are under military law, any due process that is normally taken since Parliament has stepped down, do you think this due process will remain the only way to put forward our objections? Meaning, can we explore other avenues to object now if it continues to stay under martial law for, say, 12 months? Or will we just have to wait and see?
I would say that whilst we are under martial law, that still falls under the current kind of standing of the legal and legislative system, which is still in a lower jurisdiction than, say, something like the Empower movement that is working from a higher jurisdiction. So even though it appears as we're in a special phase of lockdown and that certain rights and laws are out the door and there's a new set, all of that, it doesn't actually matter, because as soon as you go above the jurisdiction, you are able to generate results in that way. So yeah, I strongly recommend that people go look at Empower movement. Like I said, it is the most probably well-established process of this level, but by no means is it the only. We're really lucky to have some unbelievably courageous people that have pioneered certain processes themselves, and that's, you know, that I think is the great revealing of we're dealing with these issues that are so enormous, and because of that we're starting to see what lies beyond the veil. So yeah, if we go that deep, I guess that's where my mind usually sits, is that yeah, none of that actually matters. The Empower movement, they are developing notice of liabilities for other things, geoengineering, vaccines. We know that you know, there's probably going to be somewhat of a mandatory vaccine at the end of all this lockdown. So people are asking, will it still be applicable? Yes, absolutely. From the Empower's perspective, it still has standing and still goes beyond the jurisdiction of our current government, which is basically an occupational force. It has been since they took over in the 30s. And there's a lot there to be revealed that I think we need to come to terms with in order to really transcend all of this rubbish.
What's the web address that people can find out more information for Empower, James?
It's empowermovement.com.
I just actually posted a link to the documentary as well.
Thanks,
Yes, start with the documentary. Honestly, it'll be the most inspiring, beautiful thing you've ever watched. We had a big event here in Perth where we watched it together. There were nearly 100 of us. And then we had Cal Washington, the founder, Zoom call in, and we did a 90-minute Q&A. And it was amazing and inspiring. And anyone that's listening that has maybe been hitting their head against the wall in other issues over the years and kind of didn't feel much traction, and they've stepped away from trying to do things for the community and the collective. I totally understand that retraction, but you know, now is a beautiful time in history where we have access to information that is highlighting the causal factors of our pain and suffering and the control. So, you know, with that comes enormous power. So please come back out of your shell if you've gone into one and connect on that level, because it's exciting times.
Deanne, if we put our devices in airplane mode, are we protected?
Yeah, they may still know where you are. But, you know, from a security level, no. From a radiation level, yes. And I've seen a lot of people put out information around, you know, not putting it on, putting it on flight mode, and it's still emitting. It'll still emit if your Bluetooth's on or your Wi-Fi's on while you're in flight mode. But no, flight mode doesn't emit. And, you know, like, this is how, like, I am constantly driving to different clients' homes. I'll put the address in Google Maps, and then once I've found the address, I'll turn my phone onto flight mode. The phone is still able to receive, which is a different setting in itself. It's a little bit like a sat nav, so it means it can, the incoming radiation it can take in, but it doesn't emit any radiation. So I can still have my phone on flight mode in my car, and once I get, you know, out of the city, the exposure within my car is 0. So yeah, you know, it's fine. It's what I recommend for children, it's how I set up homeschool areas, all sorts of things. It should be. And also, a lot of people forget that you've on a lot of your computers, you've got flight mode as well. So even if you hardwire, you put it on flight mode, you still need to make sure that the Wi-Fi is off as well. But yes, flight mode is key.
What about electronic car keys?
Oh man, this is like the bane of my existence. But and probably my husband, because I went and bought a very expensive new car. But it depends on the settings. So it depends on, so the push button start tends to be an issue, but it depends on how your car works. So if your car sits there and constantly communicates going, where are the keys? Are they in the car? Are they out of the car? Then that can be a big issue. Some cars will just do it every now and then, and the difference in the level of radiation changes a lot. Some, you know, you just need them in there and you start, and then it doesn't bother to notice whether they're there anymore. Others will have a lot more sensors going. It really depends on the technology that's in that car. But cars can be a huge issue. A huge issue. If you're going to buy a new car, then I would definitely suggest go for a keyed version, which is getting harder, but it's definitely still doable. And then also making sure that you can disable the Bluetooth that's in the radio that's in the car as well, because again, some can, some can't. But the keys, like having the keys on you, no, not an issue so much. It's just that if you've got that car that's constantly searching, then that becomes an issue.
Question from Tanya. I have a Telstra smart modem, all hardwired and turned off the Wi-Fi. Are you saying it will still emit EMFs?
Yeah, most probably. If it's a smart modem, yes. What you can do, and what I've done previously, and I find the easiest way to do this, rather than going into, rather than sitting on the phone for forever to Telstra, is to go into the Telstra shop and then lodge your complaint and say, can you provide me a non-smart modem? If you want a phone line, which I suggest that you do, or I suggest that you have that option, they can't provide you with a non-smart phone, non-smart router, and you can't bring a different router to it if you want to use a phone line, because Telstra encrypt theirs. So if you're just looking for like your internet, then you can choose to bring your own modem to that. Otherwise, if you're looking to do it with a phone line, then you'll need to get out of that contract and go with someone else. And that's what I suggest. And I suggest it on a level in that, you know, we need to create that demand, and they need to know that that's an issue, and they need to be able to supply options for people who don't want to radiate themselves. Yeah, a simple meter, you can hire a meter or what have you, will be able to do that. Some of the older models, you could remove the chip. I tried to remove one recently, and it was, you know, embedded right in the center of the router, and I couldn't do it. But yeah, I would avoid that router and change that over for something else. In the meantime, if you're concerned until you change that, pull it out at the wall before you go to bed.
Awesome. Are the apps that measure EMF reliable? Apps on our phone?
No. Definitely not.
No worries.
Is that too forward, Deanne?
No, and I've also, you know, I have very expensive meters. I've been to a lot of places where people have their own meters, and it may not be catching different bandwidth. So also, you know, meters are designed to work within a certain bandwidth, and especially with some accuracy. Often some of the less expensive ones won't capture either end of the bandwidth that you're being exposed to as well. So that needs to be taken into account also.
I'm seeing here, Ryan, sorry, a couple of questions about bed canopies. Deanne, you shared something with me the other day. What was the building biology site over east that had bed canopies?
Building biology services. That's the natural bed canopies. Yeah.
Not cheap.
They're not cheap. Yeah, I would definitely, before you look at a bed canopy, just look at what you can bring the exposure down to first. A lot of the time you can bring it right down. And you might, you know, it might be the case that you have a cell tower that's, you know, a certain distance away, and instead of using a bed canopy, you might get away with putting, you know, like a shielded film on the window, or it might be coming from one side of the wall that you can reduce down, rather than having to shield around the whole body while you're sleeping.
And that conversation was an interesting one, because you mentioned that wearing EMF protective clothing to actually limit that as well, because you are kind of blocking in your natural magnetic field and auric field somewhat. So
yeah, and there's a few schools of thought around that, and how that impacts health, and you know, and we are designed to electrically interact with each other. So to what extent that impacts that, it depends. I know a lot of sensitive people that can't use shielded materials at all on their body, whereas other people who are electrically sensitive, it's the only way that they can go out into public spaces. So again, you know, it's that whole thing of, we don't know how it's impacting you particularly. And I think what people sometimes miss is that, say for example, you're heavy in copper versus I'm heavy in aluminium. The way that your body reacts to like a certain frequency will be different to how mine reacts to a certain frequency. if you were to visit a mental institute, you probably find that most of those are very copper toxic, especially the schizophrenics. You know, whereas other ones will start to wear the body down more. So everyone will have different impacts depending on what their body burden is, I guess.
Question from Leon: is lion's mane and other mushroom powders okay for pregnant women?
I would probably maybe ask the guys at like Super Health on that one. I'm not Super Health, is it Super Feast? What's the mushroom, guys?
Yeah, Ryan is the mushroom guy. That's your answer.
I'm like, sorry, that's for you.
I mean, from our company's perspective, we don't offer any medical advice, but it's definitely a question to ask the doctor. Yeah. There's not enough science, I believe, that indicates that's been tested with pregnant women from what I know. Jan, what are your thoughts on the Tesla Gold Bioshields EMF radiation protection system from your home and a person protection device you wear?
I think we answered that already, didn't we?
Yeah, we answered that already. Look, if I was to pick, you know, if I had to sit in a room full of Wi-Fi and there was absolutely nothing that I could do about it, Blue Shield would probably be the only one that I would consider. But yeah, we covered that earlier. It's not something that I recommend at all. It's always looking at removing the source, and it's a lot easier than people think.
True. And where can you purchase Faraday cages from?
It depends what kind of Faraday cage you want. Faraday cage is a very loose term. I mean, your car can be a Faraday cage. It depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to create like a bedroom, like a Faraday cage bedroom, because say, for example, you're in a build that, or an apartment build or something like that, I think, and I went over this earlier, you've got to be so careful about this because it works both ways. You bring anything in that space that's emitting. And like I say, we're not just talking about radio frequencies, we're talking about electric fields and dirty electricity and stuff like that. As far as an actual Faraday cage goes, really you're probably just talking about a bed canopy. And Building Biology Services have those, Yoakum has those, or you can buy them on site, but you do need to know what your actual exposure level is, what you're trying to mitigate, because different materials have different properties and different frequencies require different materials. So you need to be a little bit well versed in that ish before you go ahead and look at doing something like that.
Question from Scott. The Bioshield I am speaking of is Russian scientist technology, and it's a USB chip, the quantum tech that's supposed to put a sort of force around your home or body, or if in your pocket. Yeah, again, there's nothing that actually reduces the physical exposure. That's still there. So it's still the same response for me, in that until either you remove the source, or I see something that's used by a lot of electrically sensitive people and they all have the same experience in that it reduces their symptoms, then I just can't support it, or yeah. Does iodine help the body mitigate these kind of radiation? Anyone else want to answer? I think a lot of people are iodine deficient. That's probably something more that you should take up with your naturopath, to be honest. You know, there are different tests that you can do to see how your body uses iodine, and it's my understanding that the more exposure that you have, the more that your body will actually absorb iodine. So the little test that people do, you know, on the forearm, they put the iodine in. If you're iodine deficient, you'll tend to absorb more. If your body doesn't need it, then it'll kind of sit on the surface of the skin. But there's probably, you know, there probably is things that'll help. And again, it'll depend on why your body's being impacted so much. Is it because you're iodine deficient? Is it because you're heavy metal toxic? Or, you know, but I think we do overlook iodine a lot in what's going on in our health, and it is something that, you know, to take up with your naturopath or functional practitioner. Great. I have a speaker that shows high exposure. Is this normal? What sort of speaker? Is it a Sonos?
like a wireless speaker?
Sonars are particularly bad. They're very hard to hardwire if you can. Or if you're talking about a Bluetooth speaker, Bluetooth speakers, again, are a nightmare. Reason being, they often just keep emitting even when you've turned the Bluetooth off. For me, it's hardwired speakers all the way. If you have to use a Bluetooth speaker, then you want to create a certain amount of distance from what you're using and yourself. You know, if you're going to use it, put it on at the other end of the house and turn it up loud. But again, you've still got to Bluetooth something to it, which isn't great. But for me, you know, if you're wanting to put speakers through the house, then you go hardwired. If not, get speakers that don't emit Bluetooth that you can hardwire to your device or laptop or whatever you're playing music off. Also, like sound bars tend to be really bad. A lot of people, you know, the end solution with their theatre setup is that we just unplug it and don't use it. It just depends on what the setup is in your home.
Question from Leon. Would you recommend the brand of EMF tester called the 10 Mars TM?
I haven't used that one personally. Depending on what price category you're looking at, definitely hands down the best one on the market, you know, down from the gigahertz solutions ones are the Safe and Sound. They're third-party tested, they're fantastic. They are, you know, they come with certification in them. They also show the levels. They're also set to building biology standards, so they're very easy to see. You know, building biology standards are health-based standards when it comes to radio frequencies. Other ones that I've used, the little cornet is not a bad meter. Again, you know, it's not as good as the Safe and Sound, but it's not a bad little meter, and it's a bit better price range. But that one I haven't used. Yeah, so I wouldn't be able to say.
I'm not sure if people heard Deanne mention, but there is a question, so maybe multiple people are thinking it, about the difference between 5 gigahertz and 5G, because on the modem quite often you see 5G and people think if they turn that off, then they've overcome the battle. So there is a big difference between the two. One is 5 gigahertz is the frequency that the modem is emitting at, and then 5G technology is the 5th generation of wireless technology, which is a whole different system which will use a variety of frequencies. So good to not get those two confused. Someone also said here, what is this car being a microwave situation? I think he's referring to, Deanne, you mentioned that your car becomes like a microwave if you're using your phone inside there, because your phone, even if it's on and you're not calling someone, it's got an invisible handshake going on with where's the tower. So especially if you are talking on it, then it's even worse. But a lot of those frequencies bounce around inside what is a metal cage. So that's what I think was meant by the car becoming, you know, somewhat of a microwave, which is just good to not have it on at all. The question, what do you think on possible forced COVID-19 vaccination? The COVID-19 situation, I think, deserves a night in itself. And I was trying to get Deanne to do something with me to discuss, but I don't know how open that conversation can be. But I think it's important that we create alternative narrative, well, not an alternative narrative, but we have the conversations that a lot of people are probably thinking and is being overwhelmed by the mainstream narrative, because there are a lot of questions that aren't being acknowledged or answered. And I can tell by some of these questions wanting to go deeper into nanotech and other stuff that, you know, there's a lot of people that have probably been researching for a while, and there is a lot to it, and it's important that we do address things on that level. Maybe not tonight though.
What I will just say to people is that, you know, if you're a parent or an individual and you're really concerned about forced vaccinations, then there's several groups that I suggest that you join and understand and sort of research your rights around that and what that actually means. I myself am not concerned, and I'm very confident that I can mitigate that. And I feel very positive about that. So I don't want people, I know that is an absolute hands down massive fear for a lot of people right now, and I don't want people to feel that way. There are definitely things being done in the background and people working on those sorts of solutions. So I don't know if the Choosing Freedom group or whoever is happy to post a few links to things that people can do if that's a concern.
If that is a big concern, which understandably is for a lot of people, and if you're thinking about things on the level that some people have shared here, then come and join us at Choosing Freedom. It's a Perth-based group, and maybe you guys are down south or over east, but it's also an educational group. We're just geared towards action. So, you know, we do want to encourage actual action, and the idea of, you know, holding each other's hands and supporting each other through these non-conventional processes that are peeling back the most incredible layers to what's going on. That's a big part of what we're about. So honestly, if it's that much of a concern, then you're probably going to want support as you go down that path. And that's what we as a community at Choosing Freedom are trying to provide. So I'd suggest emailing, getting in touch, joining us on Facebook, or emailing us if you're not on Facebook, and looking at certain information that you know, might be shared within that smaller community, and certain things that are only shared on email, to be honest. So
I just had a look on the chat, and one of the comments on there was directed to me to please stop talking in a way that this is inevitable. I'm really about giving you guys practical ways to mitigate this should it come through. I guess the reason that I talk about this as being kind of inevitable is not so much because of the small cell infrastructure or the 5G infrastructure. I guess when I talk about it, it's more because we currently are bathing in a large sea of radiation, and I really want to encourage people to take action on their current exposure. But I wouldn't be here if I didn't think that we stood a chance against this rollout. And to be honest, my honest opinion is that the infrastructure won't really work anyway. And I think there's going to be a lot of issues that come up with that. And, you know, yeah, we need to be really active on it, but I think we need to be very active on our current exposures too.
yeah, and someone had asked me to put back up the do's and don'ts, the second page. They didn't get a screenshot. Sorry, Katie. I'm not sure if you're still here. So I won't pop it back up, but it is on ehtrust.org. So that's the Environmental Health Trust website, ehtrust.org. I'll just write that alongside. Get on there and check it out. And the million other resources that are on there and ready to be printed and shared. It's the best.
Just quickly, I might just add, because this tends to, people forget about this, we talk so much about wireless, just with your cordless phone acts the same way as a router, the base station for it does, so that will just continually emit. So if you're at home and you're like, okay, what can I do tonight to kind of reduce my exposure, and you're going to go home, you're going to chuck everything, you know, your phones and devices on flight mode, you're going to switch your Wi-Fi off, turn your cordless phone, if you've got one, unplug it and take the batteries out the handset if you can, because they'll just keep searching otherwise. That's something that's really important that we often forget. And also baby monitors, especially if they've got a video component to them, they're amongst some of the highest I've measured. So we need to make sure that, you know, when we're talking Wi-Fi and internal exposures, that we are talking about baby monitors, cordless phones, amplifiers, those sorts of things.
Thanks, Deanne. I think we're just about there. We'll start to wrap it up. It's really empowering to hear from experts in the field that the infrastructure is not going to work, and that we have solutions. We have towns that have stopped 5G. We have working groups and legal systems that can protect us from these things. It's just really now a matter of action, and everyone on this webinars, you know, staying up late to hear the information, and I no doubt they've got a fire burning to really get involved. So as mentioned, there's links will also be added in the next 24 hours to groups that we can all be joining, information that we can be researching and schooling ourselves on tools for implementation. So it's an exciting time. It's time to collaborate and join together and stay on top of these things that are happening in society. So I'll leave it there, and I want to thank Deanne, James and Lou very much for joining the panel tonight from such a small group down in the southwest that was concerned about their health and the 5G to really come together and connect with you guys has been phenomenal, and I'm very grateful, and I'm sure everyone that's listening is. This webinar is obviously recorded, so it's important that we all share it with our friends, and that people that might be interested can now view it and get access to the science and the tools for stopping 5G. So
yeah, thanks Ryan. Thanks for contacting us and putting on the event. It's a shame that we couldn't get down and have our weekend getaway that we had planned. But it's good to connect with everyone on the digital platform. Maybe we reached a few people that we wouldn't have down in Busselton. But like you said, it's time for collaboration. So the system relies on isolation and ignorance. So become informed and connect. That's the biggest thing we can do. And the doors that open from there are just amazing. So yeah, hopefully we can all stay in touch and work together on this issue.
And I cover the Southwest as well. So if you feel like it's all a bit too much and you just want someone to actually come out and do it for you, you can give me a call. That is what I do. So I don't want anyone to feel as though, you know, we spoke about so much information today, but I do encourage jump on for the video series. And yeah, I really want people to feel as though they can do this, and looking at the exposures and where they're coming from and the materials that we have and the shielding, that, you know, I really do feel like we can still create spaces where we can still thrive and be healthy regardless of what happens.
Very empowering. Thanks very much, guys. We'll call it a day, and we'll chat offline.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you.